It looks an awful lot like a bowl of Pepto-Bismol. The distinctive chalky pink color probably isn't one you'd associate with soup. Then again, if you lived in the European country of Lithuania, you'd be pretty familiar with the dish made from beetroot, kefir yogurt, cucumber, boiled eggs, and chives, and then served cold. It's šaltybarčiai, a soup said to be a summertime staple Lithuanians can't live without. And to celebrate it, the capital went heavy on pink last weekend, while a festival tried to set a record for the most people eating šaltybarčiai at once and at a table big enough for 1,200 of them. But that's not all. A super long bubble slide into a soup bowl, a soup carrying contest with the goal of not spilling it. It was all part of an event as distinctive as the soup itself, and the locals agreed it was in great taste. Rolling through our last week on air this spring season, this is The World from A to Z. I'm Carl Azuz, always happy to see you. There have been a lot of ups and downs in relations between North and South Korea since 1953, when an armistice formally stopped the fighting in the Korean War. Those relations today are not at a high point. Over the past week, North Korea has floated hundreds of balloons across the border. They've carried trash, manure, cigarette butts, and paper scraps into South Korea. The North says it's done this in response to balloons sent its way by activists in the South. Those have carried leaflets critical of the North Korean government, USB sticks with South Korean TV dramas, which are illegal in the North, and world news. North Korea controls the news its citizens are allowed to see. After almost a week of sending trash balloons, the North said it was done for the time being, but South Korea says a deal from 2018 aimed at smoothing out tensions between the two countries is off. What does that mean? Well, until what the South calls mutual trust is restored, it plans to resume military drills near the border that divides the two countries. And it might also resume using loudspeakers to broadcast more international news, play K-pop songs, and speak out against the North Korean government. This doesn't mean the two countries are going to start fighting each other again. At this point, it's more about harassment. But North Korea has a relationship with China, and South Korea is an ally of the United States. So observers around the world are closely watching what happens on the Korean Peninsula in case tensions continue to rise.
World of knowledge. Where would you find the Aitken Basin? Venus, West Africa, Antarctica, the Moon. It's also called the South Pole Aitken Basin, but it's not anywhere near Antarctica. This is a feature on the far side of the Moon.
This successful lunar landing is certainly an accomplishment for China on a scientific front, but it's also a source of patriotism as the nation looks to assert itself as a dominant space power.
The Chang'e 6 space probe touched down on the far side of the moon Sunday morning Beijing time. It landed on the South Pole, an area known as the Aitken Basin. The goal is to collect samples that experts say could provide clues into the origin of the moon, Earth, and the solar system. Yet this mission is helping China get data and the technical skills as it looks to propel its ambitions on the moon, including a research base. There is no crew on board, robots are at work. It comes at a time when other nations have lunar ambitions, including the United States and India.
China is planning other launches as it maintains its goal of sending astronauts to the moon by 2030.
On this date in world history. June 4th, 1876, a train called the Transcontinental Express, because it's fun to say it like that, pulled into San Francisco, California. It was a safer and probably more comfortable journey than the wagon train and stagecoach trips that preceded it, and the travel time from New York was considered blindingly fast, 3.5 days. The Transcontinental Railroad was rolling. On this date in 1919, the U.S. Congress passed the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, 41 years after it was introduced in Congress. It guaranteed American women the right to vote, and it was ratified by the states on August 18, 1920. And June 4, 1989 saw violent assaults by the Chinese military on protesters in Beijing. For months before that, tens of thousands of college students and others had pushed for economic, political, and social changes in the communist country. The government called the protests counter-revolutionary, and though it was divided over the use of force, it ordered the military to clear protesters out of Tiananmen Square. That started June 3rd and continued through the 4th. China's government said 241 people, including some soldiers, were killed, and it's tried to keep references to the event quiet. Historians outside China say thousands died.
Meet the friendly mascots of France's 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games. They're Phrygian bonnets, caps. But the history of this hat is less than friendly. For many, it's a symbol of freedom. It's most notably associated with the French revolutionists and celebrates the spirit of the French Revolution. But that conflict is among the most gruesome rebellions of all time. In the late 1780s, the French were restless. The nation had spent a lot of money in support of the American Revolution. Heavy taxes were also needed to support the extravagant spending of King Louis XVI. In 1789, Louis held the Estates General, an assembly that included representatives from the nobility, clergy, and lower class. The initial idea was to achieve better voting rights and representation for ordinary people. Polling at the time favored the upper class because their votes were counted as more, despite the lower class accounting for the majority of the French population. The French lower classes ended up forming the National Assembly, storming Bastille, writing a constitution, and eventually executing the King of France. What followed has become known as the Reign of Terror. Maximilien Robespierre headed up the so-called Committee of Public Safety. Revolutionaries guillotined suspected enemies over a 10-month period. Most of the victims were aristocrats, and more than 17,000 people were tried and executed. The reign ended when Robespierre himself suffered the same fate. So it's a little odd that the 2024 Olympics organizers decided to make their mascot a Phrygian cap, a symbol that reminds us of, well, what I just described.
But Olympics organizers aren't focusing so much on that guillotine part. They say it's all about, quote, leading a revolution through sport and recognizing caps as a symbol of freedom. So maybe critics don't need to lose their heads over it, if you know what I'm saying. Quick check of who's watching this Tuesday kicks off in Canada, where Mr. Purcell's class is with us today from the province of British Columbia. So good to see everyone at Hatsick Middle School in Mission. Moving to Massachusetts, it's Mr. Taylor's class we're visiting next at Bi-County Collaborative. Thanks to our friends in Walpole for making us part of your day. And let's take a minute, man, to win it, man, with the Minute Man, Mr. Quakenot's class. We see you at Central High School. Hope all is well in St. Paul, Minnesota.
With this year's historic reemergence of a pair of cicada broods in full swing, so too is cicada fever, with fervent fans taking flight and hungry predators taking a bite. But with billions of the red-eyed emergent bugs making their way above ground, one ultra-rare blue-eyed cicada is instead making headlines in Illinois, thanks to a keen-eyed 4-year-old. Little Jack Bailey of Wheaton made the super unique discovery in his backyard, and after snapping a few pics, he let it go. Then, realizing the rarity of the cicada, Jack and his 2 sisters took to the yard with flashlights and actually found the blue-eyed bug again. The family then donated the specimen to the famous Field Museum, where in a vast collection of cicadas dating back more than a century, this is reportedly a first. The rare mutation earns the blue-eyed variation a 1 in a million descriptor among experts, but with billions of cicadas in emergence right now, the odds of finding another one are actually a shade better.
They should name it Bluey. Then when people see it, they could say, bingo. Sure, the blue-eyed bug might bug some insectophobics, but if you get paid to cogitate or meditate on what made a cicada have a shade of radiant blue as the hue, all the better to see you, you wouldn't need to bug out when keeping your antenna up for a bug worth keeping an eye out for. I'm Carl Azuz, and that's the world from A to Z. Please join us again tomorrow. It means the world to have you watching.